We are all familiar with Disney's classic fairy tales: Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, Snow White, and more. But what a lot of people don't know is that not only did these fairy tales not originate under Disney, they also have some dark origins. The Disneyfication of these tales include more than just a happy ever after ending. A lot of these adaptations reinforce the status quo in regards to gender, class, and beauty. Before we discuss how these fairy tales were Disneyfied, we must first talk about what Disneyfication actually is. Disneyfication is the transformation as of something real or unsettling into a carefully controlled and safe environment with similar qualities. In plain words, this means the changing of something not suited for kids into something that is PG-13, safe, and entertaining. Some examples of this is the adaptation of the Book of Exodus with the Prince of Egypt. The movie ends on the most hopeful point possible after the crossing of the Red Sea, showing Moses coming down with the Ten Commandments. It stops there on a happily ever before note, leaving out all the business with the golden calf, the Hebrew struggles and wandering in the desert for 40 years, and Moses bearing from the promised land and death. Another similar example is the retelling of Bible stories with VeggieTales. Also, the Tom and Jerry movie. They ditched most of the slapstick, started to talk and sing, became best friends, and helped a little girl reunite with her father. Now that we have a better understanding of Disneyfication and how it shows up in media, we can dive into how these fairy tales have been Disneyfied. If you're unfamiliar with the original versions of these fairy tales, I have put links in the description box below to the original version. Let's start with Cinderella. Cinderella knew her mother before she died. Cinderella's mother told her to be good and pray, and the tree that Cinderella buried at her mother's grave grew and rewarded her with dresses to attend the balls. There was no fairy godmother. Instead of getting things from her fairy godmother, Cinderella got things from the birds that nested in the trees from her mother's grave. There were no mice. Instead of talking mice, doves helped Cinderella do chores and get ready for the ball, and they did not talk. The stepsisters weren't ugly. Rather, they were considered beautiful girls, although their nasty attitudes were still the same. The stepsisters were punished for their awful behavior towards Cinderella. Their punishment was to have their toes and heels cut off by their mother, and their eyes were also pecked out by the doves. Now let's look at the differences of Snow White. The evil queen's stepmother does not ask for Snow White's heart in a box. She actually asks for Snow White's lungs and liver to eat. When the prince finds Snow White dead, he insists on carrying her body away due to her immense beauty when the poisonous apple dislodges from her throat and she awakens. The evil queen is punished for her deeds. She is forced to wear a pair of glowing hot iron shoes and dance in them until she dies. Now let's look at the differences in Rapunzel and Tangled. Rapunzel's parents were poor, common folk. In Disney's version, her parents were royalty. The enchantress doesn't kidnap Rapunzel. Rapunzel isn't taken as a baby, but her parents made a deal with the enchantress to give her their firstborn child in exchange for rampions. Rapunzel's hair is not magical and does not have any healing powers. Rapunzel is casted out the tower by the enchantress after she learns of Rapunzel's deceit. Now let's look at the Disneyfication of The Little Mermaid. Ariel's transformation is not painless. In Disney's version, Ariel's transformation to a human is quick and painless. However, in the original, every step she takes is made to feel like she's walking on daggers. If Ariel does not get the prince to marry her, she will die. Her sisters sell their hair in order to bring Ariel a dagger to kill the prince and reverse the curse. In Disney's version, Ariel is just cursed to belong to Ursula. The prince sees Ariel as a friend. In Disney's version, the prince marries Ariel. Only the sea witch has the power to give Ariel legs. In Disney's version, Ariel's father also has this power. Now that we have looked at how Disney has changed these fairy tales, let's look at how this can impact us. Disney films inspire at least as much cultural authority and legitimacy for teaching specific roles, values, and ideas than traditional sites of learning such as public schools, religious institutions, and the family. This means that we learn what we know about society, i.e., gender roles, class roles, patriarchy, social hierarchy, and so on and so forth, from places such as schools, religious institutions like the church, and of course our family, but also, and more importantly, from places such as television and films. And we do know that Disney is one of the most known children's television and films companies. With that being said, Collier, Meek, and others did a study looking at the systematic quantitative comparison of the main characters' attributes, actions, and outcomes in a thematically unified, highly popular grouping of Disney films, and found that on average, masculine characteristics displayed were higher for princes than princesses, and feminine characteristics were higher for princesses than for princes. Meaning that in a majority of Disney films, masculine characters are usually portrayed in stereotypical male ways, and feminine characters are usually portrayed in stereotypical female ways. Further analysis concluded that princesses were rescued more than they performed rescues. In contrast, princess characters performed rescues and were rescued the same amount of times. However, although princess results were erroneous, there were a significant factor of the rescues performed by them, which were often climatic. Also, no princess were able to perform a final rescue without the assistance of a prince. This can be seen when Disney removed the part about Ariel's sisters selling their hair to give Ariel a dagger to kill the prince and save her life. This quote-unquote rescue would have happened without a prince or a male figure. In some of the changes Disney has made to their adaptations, we can see changes in power between genders. For example, in the original version of The Little Mermaid, only the Sea Witch has the power to give Ariel legs, but in Disney's version, her father / the king also has this power. More often than not, these adaptations can be seen as reinforcing the status quo. The changes we see in Cinderella convey this, such as when the stepsisters were made to be ugly and not beautiful like how they were in the original. Making them ugly and mean gives a false reasoning as to why the sisters were mean to Cinderella: jealousy. Society, television, and films are always telling us that people are mean to those they think are more attractive to them. This can also be seen in Snow White, when the evil queen's stepmother demands the liver and lungs of Snow White because she's seen as the fairest of them all. Also, in Tangled, the enchantress doesn't kidnap Rapunzel in order to use her magic hair to keep her looking young and fresh, but Rapunzel was given to her as a deal between her parents. Of course, it wouldn't be Disney if we don't talk about the theme of love and marriage that a lot of Disney films seem to emphasize. We see how much Disney wants to enforce this with The Little Mermaid. In the original version, Ariel doesn't marry Prince Eric, but in Disney's adaptation, she does. Because how can you have a theme about love and marriage without any love and marriage in your film? Although watching fairy tale films from Disney can be entertaining, and you don't want your kids missing out on the latest Disney princess, it's important to be aware of the origins of these tales and the types of influences they can have on our children and society as a whole. I'm not saying to overanalyze every film you watch, however, sometimes it's very important to have discussions in regards to gender, stereotypes, and love with the younger generation so that they don't think that the status quo is something that they have to follow. I touched on a few differences between the original versions of these fairy tales and the Disney adaptations. But there are a ton of more differences and a ton of more stories that have been Disneyfied by either Disney themselves or by other big TV and film production studios. The point of this video wasn't to bash Disney or any other studio for these changes or for enforcing the status quo, because we see this all the time, not only in films, but in history and day-to-day interactions. However, my point was to bring awareness of this process and its impacts on children and society. Although we can't escape the Disneyfication of stories around us, we can build the tools we need to see past the Disneyfication and the messages imposed upon us so that we're not taking everything presented to us at a face value. With that being said, I urge my audience to start diving deeper into the things they watch for entertainment. Your brain is a sponge that absorbs everything around it, so it's important that you're being mindful of what you're feeding it.